The key thing that people misunderstand about hoarding disorder is that it's not about the stuff so much as it is about the feelings. Anytime you have an accumulation of clutter, it's because it's like this accumulation of trauma sitting in your face. In my case, I had a lot of stuff that was left over that reminded me of my mom who had passed away.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, a free, safe space for people to share and learn from others' experiences with mental health and addictions. I'm Todd Rennebaum, suicide attempt survivor and a recovering substance abuser. I used and abused, I guess, at one point. Well, I have a very lovely guest today. It's on a subject matter that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, and that's on hoarding. And her name is Alexandra Berrie. She's out of California, and she's going to explain hoarding, what it looked like for her, and all the different kind of strategies and treatments you can get from professionals, and maybe kind of get rid of some stigmas around it. Before we do that, I just want to say thank you so much to Co-op for sponsoring another great episode. They've been a very generous and wonderful sponsor throughout the years. It's been about a year. Anyway, either way, they've been a wonderful company throughout the years, and they've been a wonderful sponsor. I also want to say, please check out the YouTube channel, subscribe, watch some videos. I'm pretty close on there to monetizing. I don't know exactly what I'm doing when it comes to YouTube, but if you like the podcast, you'll probably like the YouTube as well. And please leave a review if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast. Please rate and review the podcast. It is so incredibly important for podcasters to get those reviews and ratings. Please, if you could do that, that'd be wonderful. Anyway, back to the show. Without further ado, I give you Alexandra Berrie.
I'm so glad that you reached out to me. Thank you so much. It's a disorder that has a lot of stigma attached to it. And one of the things that I'm hoping to do by sharing my lived experience is to take away some of that stigma.
You see hoarders, and sometimes it's just absolute garbage.
Oh
and it's
my
like
gosh.
dead cats and all types of weird stuff.
You know, I have such a love-hate relationship with that show, to be honest, because that tends to be, I think, the place of exposure that most people have. And as with any other mental disorder, hoarding disorder, and just to put in a little caveat, I'm going to use the words hoarding disorder and HD interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Sometimes it's just too long to say hoarding disorder, so I jump to HD. So
high def.
Yes.
High definition hoarding disorder.
Oh, I love it. Actually, maybe I should use that. I'm going to steal that if I may. So, yeah, shows like shows like Hoarders tend to portray people who are on a very severe end of the hoarding spectrum, right? And I bet if you and our audience members think about the people in your lives whom you know, whose spaces you've spent time in, you will see that there is a spectrum, as with any other mental disorder, right? There are some people on one end who are neat freaks and who have a very particular mental relationship with things, right? And the neat freaks tend to be people who can be as regimented in their own ways as us hoarders, because they feel like they have to keep their spaces a particular way. Then there are people who are able to tolerate a certain amount of clutter. And then there are people who are farther along on the hoarding spectrum, like myself, who have a lot of clutter. And part of where hoarding disorder seeps from being just like a quirk into being a disorder is, have you accumulated so much clutter that it impairs your ability to use your space? So I first started receiving therapy around hoarding disorder in April 2019. And it was at a point in my life where my spouse and I were having some contentious relationship issues. He is someone who has a lower tolerance for clutter than I do. And I think that before I started going to therapy, um, perhaps the assumption was, oh, she's just dirty. And the key thing that people misunderstand about hoarding disorder is that it's not about the stuff so much as it is about the feelings, right? Time you have an accumulation of clutter, it's because it's like this accumulation of trauma sitting in your face. And like there are these things that you have in your life. In my case, I had a lot of stuff that I was having a hard time figuring out what to keep, what to get rid of, how to categorize, because it was stuff that was left over that reminded me of my mom who had passed away. So, what do you do in a situation like that? It was things like letters that she had written me at various points in my life. And, like, what do you do with that, right? It's an example of her handwriting, and I don't have the opportunity anymore to see her handwrite notes to me. And the very thought of throwing them away felt so hard. And yet, they were not things that I actively needed in my life. And they were taking up space, which could otherwise be used for more productive things. So,
when did your mother pass away?
2009. And I
Okay.
had probably, so it's hard for me to pinpoint a time when I first became aware of having more stuff than a normal person. Like, I remember when I was 10, let's say, um, there was a book that I had in my room, and my mom was going through my bookcase and weeding out things and trying to downsize my book collection. And she did this at a time when I guess I was at school. And I came home and I was like, where's my book? It was a book about geese, I remember, of all things. I'm like, Mom, where's my book? I hadn't read it yet. And it really got me upset and inflamed and passionate. I remember like feeling really violated. And so we ended up going to a bookstore and buying me a book to replace it, but it wasn't the same book. But anyway, that was like one of the earliest things that when I think back on my life, like when did it start? Maybe as young as 10, there were some feelings that were stronger around attachment to my possessions than people might otherwise be expected to have.
I've often wondered if I hoard.
Uh huh.
If I turned my camera in this room, I'm pretty sure you'd be like, yeah, it's possible. And I know my grandfather was a bit of a hoarder. My
Uh
dad's a
huh.
bit of a hoarder, and to hear what you're saying, it's very relatable because I even like 12, 13 years old, I had boxes of things from when I was a kid, meant nothing. When I moved out of my house after high school and I graduated, I remember coming home and the basement had some water damage and some of my stuff was in there and they just threw it out.
Mm.
And so this is about 30 years and I still like get sad thinking about, and it was just like, it was nothing. It was stupid crap that I don't even know what it is anymore that was in there, but I'm
Yeah.
still like, I was going to keep that forever for
Yeah.
some reason.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? That's the thing about the emotional connection versus the logical and rational connection to this stuff, right? And this brings me to another point that I think that if there are people in your audience who maybe have a loved one with hoarding, a lot of the time people take approaches to friends and loved ones with hoarding disorder that are actually counterproductive. Because the impulse is you want to go in there, you want to clean up, you want to help the person, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you're like walking in and looking at a receipt maybe from 5 years ago, that to you just looks like a piece of paper and you chuck it out, um, it may have a completely different meaning to the person involved. And if you clear out stuff or you move too quickly without getting that person fully on board and without getting their consent, they're going to relapse and they're going to accumulate a lot more than, like things will come in to fill that space. The person involved needs to do the work.
We are currently, so this is another reason why I was late and why
Hmm.
this week's been bananas.
Uh-huh.
We are currently selling our house
Oh
and
my
trying to find a
gosh.
new house. And so um, I've been purging like crazy,
It's
like
such hard work.
literally truckloads of stuff
Hmm.
that is not my kids. It's not my wife's.
Hmm.
It's all my stuff. And it's like, and I've done artwork in the past. So it's like just chunks of wood. You
Uh-huh.
know?
Uh-huh.
It's weird stuff that like, I know if I had a little acreage with a big barn, it would be, I know it would just be full of stuff. But yeah, it's been very emotional purging. It's
Yeah.
also been freeing in a way. It's like, oh man, is this ever nice? It's like now when we do move, it's like I'm starting all over in a new place and it'll be nice and clean and fresh. And because I'm not gonna lie, even a year ago when we weren't gonna move, I'd look at some of my clutter and it made me feel bad. Like I would get
Mhm.
negative feelings like, why do I have all this stuff? What am I going to do with all this stuff? Will I ever use this stuff?
Yeah, I think it's also a big lift from a perspective of emotional energy. Just looking at a pile of things and thinking about, do I want to go through this right now? And the thing I,
Well, that's also, sorry, I was just diagnosed a year ago with ADHD
mm-hmm.
and they talk about doom piles and it's kind of the same thing. It's like, well, it's not a doom pile. It's my collection of stuff, but also it's like, yeah, the emotion of like, because, it's so overwhelming looking at it all in one big pile. But if I just chunk it, it's a little easier. But yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, sorry, I cut you
absolutely.
off there.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But I'm glad you said that because I was going to draw the comparison to ADHD.
Oh,
I think that, so your comment actually was very apt. I
I
think,
beat you to it.
yeah, you did. Yeah, you got the first punch in.
I
Um,
win.
Yay! Bravo. But my understanding of ADHD and from what I've seen in the people in my life that I've been close to who have had it, I think maybe the disorders bleed into each other around the margins a little bit, maybe, is that it's really hard accumulating enough energy to get started on a task that you have to do, but maybe you don't really want to do. Like there's definitely procrastination involved in common in both of those things. And so with hoarding, it's always that weight in the back of your mind about like, look at this room or look at this space. I know I should be going through it right now, but man, I don't want to.
I was asking about hoarding and OCD. How is it a
Yeah.
symptom
Okay.
or is it
Yes.
just a style of OCD?
Okay, so here's some background on that. So the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is kind of the Bible that therapists use to diagnose mental conditions. In the DSM-4, which was the previous edition, hoarding disorder was classified as a subset of OCD. However, in DSM-5, which is the current one, which came out maybe 10 years ago, I don't know, actually, but fairly recently in the world of mental therapy, hoarding has now graduated. We get our own disorder rather than being a subset of somebody else's. So, um,
Ah, you've made it.
yay! Yeah, I think that one of the key differentiations between the two, my understand, and again, I am in no way a mental health professional. I'm just talking about the things that I have learned along the way.
Mhm.
But I think one key differentiator is that we don't have the same kind of intrusive thoughts or rituals that I understand people with OCD have to help clear those intrusive thoughts. However, the um, desire for control over one's environment in that way, I think, is equally strong. Because one of the things people don't get about hoarding, like it looks like a big pile of clutter and trash, right? But actually, underneath it, it speaks to a very deep-seated desire to have control over your environment. The control just looks like we need to keep the things around because, frankly, possessions are not going to be jerks to you, right? They're not going to talk back to you. They're not going to abandon you. They're not going to hurt your feelings, right? So being able to see and keep and touch everything is helpful.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking objects are also consistent.
Yes.
It's just like you
Yes.
don't know what move, you don't have to, there's no guesswork. It is
Yeah.
exactly what it is.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
One other thing that I learned, which was extremely helpful for me, is that people with hoarding disorder, according to there was a study, I want to say it's by a professor at UC San Diego, but that might not be right. I wish I had done my homework so that I could give that person credit. Um, did fMRI imaging on people with hoarding disorder. So, fMRI stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging. And that's the one where you put the little electrode cap on and you can see the brain, regions of the brain lighting up in real time as you are exposed to various stimuli. And so, people who have hoarding disorder have less activity in a network of the brain that is called the salience network. The salience network is a part of your brain where if you're looking at something that is standing out against a background, it will pop up, right? So, for example, if I'm looking at you right now, from what I can see in the camera, there's a black background. And against that background, I see you in a green shirt. I see a little circular banner that says Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, and I see a red on air symbol. Okay. So when I'm looking at these three things, my salience network is lighting up because they are salient against the background. In other words, they're jumping out at me as recognizable and distinct. Okay. So when people with hoarding disorder look at their own clutter, there is diminished activity in the salience network as opposed to what neurotypical see. So this is a very long and complicated way of saying that I have a brain difference that makes it so that I don't even see the piles of shit that are sitting in my room.
Right. I've often wondered that
Yeah.
myself. It's like, I think when I clean my house, it's like, oh, it looks great. But I wonder often if someone else comes in and goes, holy crap, this guy has a lot of shit.
Yeah,
And
right?
I just don't see it, or you get so used to it or whatever. But that's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. So there's something wrong with our brains.
Yes, yes.
I'm not
I,
wrong. It's just
is it
different.
just different? Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And and also just like so I have a background in anthropology and I like to muse on things and like it makes sense to me from an evolutionary perspective on why a trait toward accumulating items might have been evolutionarily adaptive, right?
Hmm. What's your
Oh,
hypothesis?
so like I think that within communities, because as we know, everything's on a spectrum, right? But I think that, like, if we're looking at selection on the level of the group rather than on the level of the individual, it would make sense that a community that had one or a couple of individuals who had a tendency toward saving extra objects that might be useful someday would like have an advantage over groups who didn't have individuals like that because
Mm.
it's hard getting resources from the environment. So,
Uh-huh. I like it. So it's like, hey,
yeah.
go ask Thug. He probably has a rock that shape.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly.
Huh.
So, I think also one of the things that I would like to talk about a little bit is motivations for saving stuff. And there are lots of different flavors that hoarding disorder can manifest in. There are, it's useful to think of it as people who have different levels of skills in two processes. One is accumulation and one is discarding, right? So there are the type of hoarder who they see a great deal, right? They're like, okay, this store has 40 pallets of this drink that I like, and they're selling these 40 pallets for $40. So I'm going to buy all 40 pallets because I know I'm going to go through that drink. And what a great bargain, right?
Hmm.
Um, I perhaps flatter myself to think that that's not my particular flavor of hoarding disorder. Instead, mine comes in around the difficulty discarding possessions end of the scale. So, when I am looking at a thing, and intellectually, I know that this thing is not serving me, right? Intellectually, I can tell myself that the amount of clear space would be so much better for you, Alex, to have rather than having this item taking up that space, right? Um, but I tend to get stuck on a couple things. Either there's some emotion that's attached to it that makes it hard for me to throw away, or I get really stuck on, like, okay, I could throw this away, but is this going to go to a person who needs it rather than go in the landfill, right?
I feel
And
that one.
because, like, the idea of, you know, I have that 39th pallet of the juice drink that is still perfectly good, right? And if I just chuck it in the trash, all it's going to do is take up space in a landfill. It's not going to help anybody. And then all of the resources in its creation are just wasted. And that feels really icky to me, you know? It's just like,
Hmm.
oh, I don't want that. So, one of the tools that's been super helpful to me, there's a Facebook group called the Buy Nothing group. And this is a group where you can post an item that you have. They're post it to an audience of people who are in your hyper-local area, and people can raise their hand for it, and then the two of you message and say, you say, hey, come pick it up. and then they show up and they cart it away, and it's brilliant. But the problem
Hmm.
is it does take time.
Right. In my little town here, we have something called Pay It Forward, Indian Head.
Oh, uh-huh.
That's the name of the town. And uh, I mean, any given day, there's piles on people's driveway where it just says free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and I mean, it doesn't take long, and
No.
people are grabbing it, which is amazing. I've had things where it's like I won't give it to that person, but I'll give it to that person because I know they emotionally, it's like I know their emotions are more strong about it. It's not
Uh-huh.
just a deal for them. It's like, they're actually passionate about having this thing as much as I was. It's going to a good
Yes.
home and they love it too. And odds are
Yeah.
it's going to sit in their basement for 20 years too. And then they'll give it away to someone else. But
Yeah,
um,
or their children will throw it out after they're dead.
exactly. Yeah. But it's like, but while they have it in their basement for 20 years, they're going to love it,
Yeah,
even though they don't use it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
there's so many projects, right? Like you buy the stuff for to do the project and then it just sits and you think, "Oh, it would be so great if my closet I built those shelves so that I could have room for my shoes or whatever." And then the shelf building materials never get used.
Yeah. And I was thinking again as you were talking there about neurodiversity. I know with
Uh-huh.
ADHD, there's people have a lot of impulsivity at times. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder too if it's like that's part of because I'm not saying ADHD people are hoarders, but I'm saying there's probably some crossover or
Yeah.
overlap.
Yeah.
And I know for me, it's like when I'm driving past someone's driveway and there's a pile of junk wood, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, impulsively, I'm like, ooh, and I grab it and I put it in my car and then I take it home and I put it on the big pile of wood that my wife's already going, why do you have a pile of wood in our backyard? It's like, eh,
Uh,
eh. Oh.
I like to give habitat to spiders who need places to build webs. Yeah,
M-
something like that.
Mold
Yeah,
needs a house too.
exactly, right? No, I think absolutely there's that impulsivity that's at play, and that's part of how you accumulate the 39 pallets of whatever drink is like, this seems like a great idea at the time, and then you get there and it's less of a good idea than you thought it was gonna be.
Yeah. Uh, and I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday. No, it had nothing to do with hoarding, but it kind of
Mm.
got to hoarding, and I was like, "Hey,
Uh-huh.
cool! I'm talking with Alex tomorrow," and then I forgot.
Yay.
But but they were talking about the guy thought he had a hoarding problem, and the other person was like, "But you have," because it was like a famous comedian. He's like, "But you have like five houses and lots of room. Like if you have the room for the stuff, is it hoarding?" I was like, "That's a good question.
That's a really good question.
Is
Yeah.
it hoarding, or is it just he has enough money to create space for his hoarding?"
We'll
Like,
see. That's part of it, right? And I
yeah.
think part of it comes down to your appetite for doing the work on yourself in terms of like being able to streamline your process of taking in and releasing possessions. And, some of that has to do, of course, with your financial resources. Are you the kind of person who can afford therapy to talk about this? Many of us aren't really. I no longer have therapy because I no longer have good insurance. So, am I the kind of person who lives in a mansion? No, absolutely I am not. Do I wish that I had five houses to store all my stuff? Yes, heck yeah.
I often wonder why, like, I know people in my family kind of hoard,
Hmm.
or as we call it, collect. Uh,
Uh-huh. Yep.
but I wonder if is it DNA? Was it a trauma response? Like, you figure yours is based around trauma?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that probably the two things operate in combination with one another.
Bunny Hugs and Mental Health is supported by Co-op. I've been a member of my local co-op, Sherwood Co-op, for about 20 years. If you live in Western Canada, especially the prairies, or spent any time here, you've probably fueled up or bought groceries at a co-op. You might even have a co-op number, or 2, or 3. You know if you know. But co-op is not just a gas bar or grocery store. Although co-op is those things too, it's a different kind of business. Co-op members are owners and success is shared with everyone. Your co-op doesn't benefit one person or one corporation. Your co-op was built for everyone. Your co-op was built for your community. Learn more about co-op and find a location near you at co-op.crs. One thing I've learned through my experience with mental health and addictions is you never know what you need to hear until you hear it. Make sure to rate and review on Apple and to tell as many people as you can about the podcast so others can hear something they need to hear from one of my guests. After all, this is a free mental health service, which is a rare thing, so why not share with as many people as you can?
I think that there are certain people who have a predilection toward it already, and then when a trauma happens to them, it can get activated. That's what my therapist says that she often sees is that people will go through their lives with a certain level of stuff, and then they will like maybe lose someone who's important to them, or some other horrible event will happen, and then suddenly like the piles of stuff accumulate way more than it did. So it's hard to know, right? And definitely there's a familial component. Like people in my family also collect things. And so, like, is it in the genes? Is it in the socialization? It's impossible to know, I think, at this point, but it sure is fun to speculate about.
It's like nature versus nurture, that whole
Yeah.
chestnut. I wonder if anyone hoards genes. Speaking of genes, it's like it's in my genes to collect these genes.
That's a good question. I don't
Sorry,
know.
that was really dumb. I'm surprised you laughed. It is an emotional thing, and that's the thing that I don't know if other people understand.
Mhm.
I don't want to label myself or diagnose myself as a hoarder, but I have hoarding
Hey, join
tendencies.
us. You are welcome. And everything's a spectrum. So you can be part of the bigger
I
group.
suppose. I'm pretty sure if I was single,
Hmm.
I would live in a garbage pile and I would love that pile and everything in it. You
Yeah.
know, that's the thing. It's like there's that emotional piece to it. And it's like
Yeah.
every little thing I own, I could pick up and I remember where I got it, how I got it, and how it made me feel and why I'm keeping it.
Well, okay, maybe you didn't come on this podcast today to learn that you're a hoarder, but congratulations, here we are. Like, and and
Huzzah!
and maybe that's unfair, right? Maybe everybody does that to a certain extent. And I'm just hypersensitive to it. But like that to me is very characteristic of my own thinking patterns and what I've learned about people who also have HD. So,
Okay. Because on the other end, I don't understand people that like they'll hire an interior decorator and they'll just buy vases and things, and there's like absolutely no emotional attachment to anything in their house. They're just like, oh, I hired someone and I love it because it looks nice. And I'm like, you have no emotional tie to anything in your house? Like everything in my house, there's an emotional tie to it.
yeah, it seems funny to me too. So, uh different people do it different ways, right?
Yeah, yeah, I guess. Yeah. So there's also another show where it's uh I watch shows where this I think it's a Japanese thing or something where it's like you pick up whatever you have and it's like how does it make you feel, and if it doesn't make you feel good then you're supposed to get rid of it. And I don't think it's for hoarding, but it's more
Oh,
like house
uh-huh.
organizing.
I
But
think I know the one you're talking about. Is it Marie Kondo? And
sounds
does
right.
it, yeah, she is. So
But
in
everything
public,
makes me feel good that I own. That's the problem.
see, and part of my problem is everything that I own makes me feel crappy. And the question comes in like,
Oh,
why do you keep it around then? So Marie Kondo's whole thing, and there was 10, 15 years ago, probably 10, there was this whole boomlet in publishing, and her book was a great bestseller. It's called The Art of Tidying Up or something. It's got a better title
yes.
than that, but it's something close to that. And her mantra is, does it spark joy? Right?
That's it.
And she says, you pick up the thing, you look at it. If it sparks joy, you keep it. If it doesn't, you get rid of it. So I am starting a Substack newsletter called Does It Spark Grief? Because in
Ah,
my case, I look at things and I pick it up, and maybe it evokes these complex set of emotions in me around like grieving for people or not even people, like situations in my life that um, I remember having good memories around, and maybe those situations have passed. And like, do I keep the thing? Yes, because it ties me to those good memories. But because I'm so acutely aware that maybe my present circumstances are not the way that I would have them if I could choose. Um, so yeah, anyway, if y'all want to read more and hear more thoughts about hoarding, I'm starting a new Substack, Does It Spark Grief.substack.com.
hmm.
Yeah.
So then if it does spark grief, then
Wouldn't
what?
you get rid of it? Yeah, like I think,
I don't know.
but it's so hard, right? Because then the fear is that you lose that connection to that person or that memories. And
Yeah.
part of what makes it so very challenging for me is that I have to remind myself that my connection to that person or that time in my life is always going to be within me. But the other tricky thing about that is that as I get older, I notice that my memory is getting less good. Is that something I'm always going to be able to count on? And also, I find that my memories of my childhood are harder for me to access. And one of my therapists at one point suggested to me, um, hey, was there stuff going on in your childhood and in your background that maybe you've been repressing a little bit? So I'm wondering if for me part of like the keeping of things is like, oh, look at that thing. That's a link back. And then it helps me um, make it physical and make it real and make it
Mm,
material. So
right. And it's linked back to a positive memory, not maybe something you're
yeah,
oppressing.
yeah, one hopes.
Right, right, yeah. Yeah, it's weird. And yeah, it's weird because it maybe not for grief for me, but I do grieve for those times. So it's like,
Hmm.
oh, I remember when I was 20 years old and I'm holding whatever it is. And but then you know, at that time it was great, but then I also feel sad because I'm not in those times anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Have you have you talked to a grief counselor or
It would probably be helpful to me. I've always kind of been the sad girl. So, is,
I'm the sad boy.
I think some of us are more melancholic by nature than
Right.
others. But obviously there's some processing work that needs to happen for me. And so part of my approach to it is I've been doing a lot of Vipassana or insight meditation, which is practice in sitting with and holding all of your um, all of your thoughts and experiences without judgment. And so it's only
Mm,
by really sitting with the grief that you can process it and allow it to dissipate or not be such a heavy heavy feeling that sits on you. So I
Mm,
attempt to do that and am looking forward to maintaining a more regular and methodical practice than I currently do.
hmm. So in some ways, the objects you're hoarding, it's like you so and you have it in your closet. It's almost like your grief is in the closet. You're
Yeah.
not you're not you're decompartmentalizing your grief
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as objects, but you want to honor it by not just getting rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very apt.
Well, good luck with that.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a couple episodes on grief and it is so complex. I mean, I never even considered hoarding being another part of grief, but
Yeah. I mean,
um
and it's not for everybody, right?
right, of course, yeah.
But I can only best speak to my own experience, and that's what comes up for me.
So like when it became trouble for you hoarding, it was when you could actually see in your relationship things were changing. Your husband was starting to
Hmm.
um you know, maybe resent you. I don't know. I
Oh yeah.
that's
Yeah.
just me guessing, but
No,
so
you hit the nail on the head, and it
okay.
was absolutely bringing up challenges in my relationship, and you
Do you have
know, like
children?
yeah, I have a
Okay.
daughter. She
Okay.
just turned 10, and that's a
Okay.
whole other thing is how do you parent as a hoarder who is concerned about your child's mental well-being and mental health and the heritability component and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And like, I don't want to model for her living in a cluttered house, right? So
Yeah.
that actually has been, I gotta say, one of the best things about being in therapy for me has been understanding my motivations for change some more. And like, change is super hard, but if you're doing it for, like, maybe not just for yourself, but also for people you really love, then
Hmm.
that has been super helpful for me in terms of like thinking, okay, well, here's this pile of papers. I can put it in a paper bag from the store and just ignore it some more. Or I can boss up and I can like think about maybe let's show Emily what a clean room looks like and maybe do it for her.
Hmm. Man, having kids, it's like for me, another thing I hoard is parent guilt.
Oh yeah.
It's like I'm my worst harshest critic, and it's like
Yeah.
I know that's very common parent guilt. It's about like every
Yes.
move I make, every sentence I say to my kids, like, did I just screw them up? Are they going to resent me? And it's like, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah. There's so much
um
parent guilt to go around. It turns out there's an inexhaustible supply. If we could only turn that into like electric power on the grid, we would solve so many of the world crises. It would be
I
great.
I could run my city alone.
Right. Oh man.
So when your husband and you started, there started to be this friction, like, and you started seeing a therapist. What
Mhm.
kind of um, what was the style of treatment, or what kind
Mm.
of um strategies did they give you? You know, like
Yeah, so
they're just like, oh, well, go home and throw stuff out.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I was lucky enough to have the privilege of working with an excellent therapist named Danny Schlichter. Anyone out there who needs support with hoarding, she specializes in hoarding. And I live in the greater LA area, so I'm lucky in that you can find a therapist with deep expertise in any of a lot of like people specialize in all kinds of mental disorders. So, she worked with me primarily in a cognitive behavioral therapy modality. We are looking at the thoughts that arise. We are trying to figure out what are the root causes of those thoughts, right? And
Mm.
also, as we were just saying, in terms of family relationships, we were also working in a family systems therapy modality, right? Like, how does each person play a role that is contributing to the problem jointly? Um, I found that, like, since I was the one mostly creating the problem, the work fell to me largely to do, but it's amazing that to notice as you like unlock more insights, your family dynamics actually change. I get along so much better in my relationship with my spouse now. And I think a lot of that uh, has it really speaks to the fact that I was willing to focus on him and taking him seriously and listening to his complaints and doing the work to resolve and address the situation that I had been largely responsible for creating. Like, yeah, kids therapy is great and it helps, but and also there are in terms of like so that's all very vague, right? When we sit down with hoarders and we say to ourselves, okay, all this talk about family dynamics is well and good, but there's a pile of crap in front of me. How do I clean it? There are a couple useful techniques. One of them is called the hula hoop technique. And you take a hula hoop and you put it over a pile of clutter in your room. And that is the pile of clutter that you are focusing on in this session, right?
Mm.
And so what that means is you set aside time to really like get that hula hoop clean, right? And if it's particularly emotionally laden territory, maybe it's a very small hula hoop, right? Because it takes more emotional energy to
a,
tackle that.
a donut.
Yeah, exactly. Donut, I love that. Yeah. Um, so yeah, and you sit and you make five piles. They are
Big, medium, large, extra large.
the neuroscientist whom I was talking about earlier with the Salience Network research, that's Dr. Saxena, Saxena, just so that that came up. So you make five piles. There is ASAP, which are things that are like bills that are overdue that you need to take care of right this instant so that they don't just drift off into the ether and have negative consequences on your lives. There's a donate pile. There is a recycle pile. There is a trash pile, and there's a keep pile. And
Mm.
so you physically rearrange the things inside the hula hoop into one of those piles, and then you take action and you deal with the piles appropriately. So for the donate pile, you don't just bag up the clothes and then put them in your trunk and forget about them for 5 years. You calendar that and you say, okay, on Wednesday afternoon, right after I am done with this appointment at 3:45, I'm going to drive to the local thrift store and I'm going to donate these. So, like, it's not just about clearing the hula hoop, although it is obviously about clearing the hula hoop, but it's
Hmm.
also about how do we take appropriate action on what we find inside the hula hoop?
Yeah, taking action. That is, I mean, yeah, I struggle with that part. Well, I mean, not just with the policy, but I mean, like, I've gone to therapy before and it's like, here, do all this stuff. And it's like, then I go home and then I don't do any of the stuff, but I'm like, but I went
Hmm.
to therapy.
Yep,
It's like, well,
yep,
I made the
yep.
pile.
Well, and
Now what?
that's also like a situation that has fully happened to me is that, like the advice from my therapist, again, shout out to Dr. Schlichter, good job. Um, you sit with the hula hoop and you have 20 minutes, let's say, and work in small chunks because it can be emotionally draining work. And so you do 20 minutes, and at the end of the 20 minutes, you're like, well, crap, I still got stuff inside the hula hoop. And now I also have all these other piles.
Right.
So have I just made the problem worse for myself? So,
See, I'd also have well, I have a pile of like donate trash and then for sale.
oh, uh-huh,
And it's
uh-huh.
like, those ones, quite often it's like, even those ones, I'm like, it's borderline donate because it's like, I just
Yeah,
give me
yeah,
$5 and get it out of here so that I don't ever have to worry about it again. But,
yeah.
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 Hmm.
I'm so happy if I've been able to spread some awareness. And, if I ultimately help one person be nicer to themselves around this, then I'm very happy and I feel like my job is done.
Hmm. Wow. Well, that's great. I'm starting to realize I see I have a room full of dead cats that I've been keeping. I'm
Yeah,
starting to
how did
walk.
they smell?
Oh, fine. I mean, for
Okay,
me,
cool.
because my brain, the background,
You got
foreground
the
thing you were talking.
salience network. It doesn't
Yeah,
process the smell. That's fantastic.
yeah. It just smells like air to me.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, so good. So good. My dad, when I was a kid, always made this terrible dad joke. I once knew a dog who didn't have a nose. Then you say, how did you smell?
How did it smell?
Terrible. But
So, when things got better with your husband,
uh-huh.
was it partly because you were starting to get rid of stuff, or was it
Yeah.
just the fact that you took action and was starting to talk to a therapist about it? You know what I mean?
I think both, right? Like
Right.
starting to talk to a therapist demonstrated to him that I was taking his needs and perspectives seriously, right? And so that in and of itself, like opened up
Right.
channels of communication that had previously been closed. And then also like actually doing the thing and actually getting rid of junk
Mm.
made him very happy. So, I'm not gonna say it's a panacea and that we've solved all of our issues. Hoarding, like in a weird way, is similar to alcoholism. I call myself a hoarder in recovery. And I think inherent to the process of healing something from something, you're going to have relapses and you're going to have backslides. And it's a thing that I feel like I kind of need to constantly be on my guard against is, oh, is this cropping back up? How am I going to carve out time out of my schedule to sit and deal with this? And do I still have the appetite for doing that emotional work? If maybe I'm not feeling it right now, what are the reasons? Who can I think about to help me give a reason to find that I want that motivation for?
I wonder, like, if you were single, you never did get married, would you be happy just having a bunch of stuff,
It's
or
a
would
good question, right? Because I'm
uh,
not gonna lie, I've had the thought where, I've said to myself, well, if he would just get off my back about it, then all of my problems would be solved. But like, obviously, that's not true, right?
yeah.
I like to think that I have enough insight into the condition that I would see it for what it is and want to tackle it anyway. But
Mm,
at the same time, like, again, it's a spectrum, and any one person's level of insight into your own mental conditions is hit or miss. And I know that there are huge blind spots that I'm not seeing. So,
mm. And yeah, and I mean, it's a balance too. Like, you have to have a little hoarding,
hmm
but your husband has to give a little leeway for that. But yeah, it's that, like,
yeah,
there's a
like,
line and there's a balance, and yeah, there's a tipping point.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm. Hmm.
Exactly.
Does he have to give you reminders once in a while? It's like,
Yeah.
we're pushing the line here again. Maybe get rid of this bag of paper.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And, sitting down together and like carving out a chunk of time in the calendar to, okay, he's gonna do admin stuff and catch up on his backlog, and I'm gonna sit and do hoarding work. And just having companionship too is another thing that for me has been huge and makes it a lot different and better, is that I don't have to feel so lonely, because loneliness is a big part of it too.
My stuff loves me as much as I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, as
Mm.
you can imagine, as someone who relates to inanimate objects, there's kind of an inherent loneliness baked into that proposition, right?
So it's that time again for that Some Bunny special, a segment where we chat about who cooperated in your mental health journey and helped fill your emotional tank. Brought to you by Co-op, and Co-op's a wonderful sponsor and company here in Canada, in Western Canada especially. I have a feeling I know who you're going to say, but throughout this journey, or it could be at any point in your life, who would you like to give a shout out to for being a big supporter?
Mm. So, first of all, thank you, Co-op. I appreciate that your support makes it possible for me to be here talking about this. I think it's a super important issue that not enough people know enough about. So, to answer the question, I have so much gratitude and appreciation for my dear spouse, Zach. Thanks for being a solid cheerleader and supporting me. And also, big thank you to Dr. Danny Schlichter, who for sharing her clinical expertise and helping me really understand what's going on with my brain. I will also say that there's been some psychedelic assisted therapy, which has been super helpful for me. So if readers are, or not readers, if your audience has heard about this and is wondering, is this something that people actually get value out of? It's been great for me.
Oh, so which psychedelics have you used treatment with?
So I have used primarily with ketamine,
Mm-hmm.
because I also have some depression that I think it's funny how the mental disorders get entangled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, So, yeah, have had treatment resistant depression, and ketamine has helped with that. And just making those connections first socially, and then having my social connections being able to point me toward professional mental health professionals who understand. Like, what do these substances do with your neurotransmitters? How does this help co regulate your brain? Has been extremely, extremely valuable.
Thank you so much for that, Alexandra. We had a very lovely time talking with each other. We also had some technical difficulties. I don't know if you could tell or not, but there was a couple times where the audio kind of changed, and it was a bit of a mess. But we got her done. So that's wonderful, and thank you again. I hope to talk to you again sometime. I think we will. I think we'll keep in touch because we seem to have bonded a bit there. Hey, do you like shirts and coffee mugs? Because you can go to the link in the show notes, and there's all types of merchandise there from the podcast here. So, yeah, if you like that kind of stuff, go check that out. And if you kind of do any organizing of speakers for either your school or your work or whatever, and you're looking for a speaker to talk about mental health stuff or addictions or whatever, please reach out to me at bunnyhugspodcast@gmail.com, and I would love to be a part of that. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and thank you to my guest, Alexandra, and thank you to Co-op. And until next time, please remember to make your beds and take your meds. Bye.